Behind enemy lines, hidden from the world's view, Hitler's regime was secretly building weapons unlike anything the Allies had ever seen. While bombs fell across Europe, deep in underground bunkers and isolated labs, Nazi scientists were creating machines so advanced, they seemed ripped from the future. From the jet-powered Me-262 that could outrun every Allied fighter, to magnetic sea mines that detonated without a sound or a trace, these weren't just weapons, they were game-changers. Dangerous, unpredictable, and decades ahead of their time, these inventions didn't just threaten the course of World War II, they threatened the very future of warfare itself. Today, we expose the 15 Nazi technologies so shockingly advanced, they were banned from use. Could a Nazi warplane from the 1940s really be the ancestor of today's stealth bombers? It sounds impossible until you meet the Horten Ho-229. Designed by the Horten brothers in the dying days of World War II, this jet didn't just break the rules of aviation, it rewrote them. A sleek, flying wing powered by twin turbojets, it could soar at over 600 miles per hour and climb to nearly 50,000 feet. Armed with cannons and R-4M rockets, it wasn't just fast, it was built to kill. But the most terrifying part? It was nearly invisible to radar. Using a blend of wood and carbon-based glue, the Horten was one of the first aircraft to deliberately reduce its radar signature, at a time when most planes were still metal and fabric. In 1944, this was science fiction made real. When U.S. forces captured a prototype, they realized this wasn't just another Nazi experiment. It was a glimpse into the future. And if it had taken to the skies in time, the air war might have ended very differently. Today's B-2 Spirit bomber? It owes more to this Nazi blueprint than most realize. In fact, Northrop Grumman even built a replica just to study its secrets. The Horten Ho-229 wasn't banned just because it was German. It was banned because it was too advanced, too unpredictable, and too close to changing history forever. It looked like a toy tank, but the Goliath was no child's play. This small, silent crawler carried something far more lethal than bullets, pure explosives. Built by Nazi engineers in the 1940s, the Goliath was a remote-controlled tracked mine, operated with a joystick and a long cable. It could carry up to 220 pounds of high explosives and steer itself straight into enemy lines. No pilot. No crew. Just destruction on command. Designed to clear mines, destroy tanks, and flatten bunkers, the Goliath crept low to the ground, quiet and easy to miss until it was too late. Once it reached its target, it exploded with terrifying force, taking out machines, fortifications, or anything unlucky enough to be nearby. More than 7,000 were built, making it one of the earliest large-scale experiments in robotic warfare. Sure, it had flaws, cut the cable, and it was done. It wasn't fast, either. But the idea? Decades ahead of its time. Modern military drones and ground bots? They all traced their DNA back to this little killer on tracks. The Goliath wasn't just a weapon, it was proof that remote-controlled war had already begun. Imagine a bomber so advanced, it didn't fly through the sky, it skipped across the edge of space. That was the Nazi vision behind the Silbervogel, or Silverbird. Not a dream. A real concept. And its target? New York City. This wasn't some ordinary aircraft. The Silbervogel was designed as a suborbital spaceplane. The plan? Launch it on a rocket-powered sled, blast it into the upper atmosphere, and let it coast across the globe, skimming the edge of space like a stone skipping across water. At hypersonic speeds, it would be nearly untouchable. No radar, no fighter, no missile could stop it. Once it reached the US, it would drop a bomb on Manhattan, then glide thousands of miles to safety in Japanese territory. And here's the terrifying part, the physics actually worked. Nazi scientists were already exploring principles that would later power NASA's space shuttle program. This was space warfare, decades before space was even a battlefield. But the Silbervogel never flew. Wartime chaos, limited resources, and the crumbling Third Reich kept it grounded. Still, the fact that a space-powered bombing run was even on the table in the 1940s? That wasn't just bold. It was a warning. The future of war was already being written, in the shadows of history. No weapon in history had ever struck with such terrifying speed, or fallen from such heights. The V-2 rocket wasn't just a Nazi superweapon. It was the moment warfare left the ground and entered the stratosphere. Built in secret, launched in fear, the V-2 was the world's first long-range ballistic missile. It didn't glide. It soared, ripping through the edge of space at over 3,500 miles per hour. There was no siren, no warning. If you heard it, it had already hit. The silence was its deadliest weapon. A ghost in the sky, delivering destruction with surgical precision. When it rained down on cities like London, there was nothing anyone could do. It struck without mercy, and without defense. The technology behind it was mind-bending. Liquid-fueled engines. Vertical launches. Suborbital flight paths. All during a war when most nations were still perfecting propellers. The V-2 didn't belong in the 1940s. It belonged in the future. And behind it all was Wernher von Braun, a name that would echo long after the rockets stopped falling. Captured after the war and brought to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip, von Braun quietly shed his Nazi past and began writing a new story, one that would take mankind not to ruin, but to the moon. Yes, the same man who built Hitler's rocket of terror would go on to build the Saturn V, the launch vehicle that carried Apollo 11 to the surface of the moon. From a weapon that haunted the skies, to the rocket that made history. The V-2 didn't just change the battlefield, it changed our place in the universe. What if the most advanced fighter jet of World War II was ready to fly, but showed up just a little too late? That's the story of the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter, and one of Nazi Germany's greatest what-ifs. Unveiled in 1944, the Me 262 wasn't just modern, it was light years ahead. With twin-jet engines, it could scream through the sky at over 540 miles per hour, almost 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft. Pilots who saw it in action said the same thing: you couldn't catch it, and you couldn't outrun it. Armed with 4 deadly 30mm cannons and capable of launching rockets, it was designed to shred bomber formations and tilt the air war back in Germany's favor. And for a brief moment, it did. B-17s fell from the sky, and Allied pilots suddenly found themselves facing a machine that didn't play by the old rules. But brilliance alone wasn't enough. Production was painfully slow. Fuel was scarce. Pilots were undertrained. And Hitler, obsessed with offense, demanded the Me-262 be used as a bomber too, delaying its deployment as a pure interceptor. By the time it arrived in real numbers, it was too late. The Allies were everywhere. The skies, the factories, the airfields, all under pressure. The Me-262 could have rewritten the rules of air combat. Instead, it became a symbol of lost potential, a weapon from the future, trapped in a war that was already slipping away. When the skies of World War II turned into battlegrounds, most bombs simply fell. But one didn't, it hunted. This was the Fritz X. Not just a bomb, but a weapon so advanced it could think midair. Weighing over 3,400 pounds, it wasn't dropped and forgotten. It was flown. Nazi engineers had built a radio-controlled glide bomb, tail fins, control surfaces, and a signal system that let operators steer it toward moving targets from over 20,000 feet above. In a time when most bombs relied on luck and gravity, this one relied on precision. And its impact? Devastating. The Fritz X could slice through nearly 30 inches of steel armor, enough to split open a battleship like it was nothing. In 1943, it did exactly that. The Allies were stunned. No radar, no flak, no evasive maneuver could stop it. Once released, it didn't need eyes on the target. It found its way, fast and final. It was, in every way, the world's first smart bomb. And its influence echoes in every precision weapon we use today, from laser-guided missiles to GPS-enabled airstrikes. The Fritz X wasn't just ahead of its time. It was a glimpse into a darker future. A future where wars wouldn't just be fought with brute force, but with precision, silence, and terrifying control. How do you turn a bomber into a flying bomb, and still let the pilot escape? Nazi Germany thought they had the answer, the Mistel. It wasn't a science experiment. It was a real, combat-ready weapon, and one of the strangest ever built by the Luftwaffe. Picture this, a fighter plane strapped on top of an unmanned bomber packed with explosives. The two aircraft took off together, controlled by a single pilot from the fighter. Once they neared the target, usually a fortress, a warship, or a bridge, the pilot would release the bomber and guide it into a final, deadly dive. Then he'd pull up and fly away. The bomber wasn't just carrying bombs, it was the bomb. Modified with a massive shaped charge, it could blast through thick concrete or steel. In tests, it worked. And in theory, it could have been a game changer. But in reality, the Mistel was plagued by problems. It was heavy, slow, and awkward to fly. Coordinating a launch took time Germany no longer had. Fuel demands were high, missions were complex, and Allied air dominance made takeoff risky. Still, the fact that such a weapon even existed shows just how far Nazi engineers were willing to go in their obsession with destruction. The Mistel wasn't just bizarre, it was dangerously close to redefining what air warfare could look like. If it had arrived earlier, with more support, history might have had a very different ending. What if a single soldier could shoot down a plane with a handheld rocket launcher? That was the radical idea behind Nazi Germany's Fliegende Faust, nicknamed the Air Fist. And while it never fully made it to the battlefield, the concept was shockingly ahead of its time. Developed near the end of World War II, the Fliegende Faust was a prototype weapon meant to put anti-aircraft power directly into the hands of infantry. Imagine a soldier standing on the ground, gripping a multi-barreled launcher, and firing a wave of rockets straight into the sky. The most advanced version, the Fliegende Faust B, came with 9 barrels and fired small, explosive rockets in a spread pattern, hoping to hit low-flying enemy aircraft within about 1,300 feet. But in practice, it struggled. The rockets were slow, the aim was tricky, and Allied planes were getting faster and flying higher with every passing month. By the time the weapon was ready, the war was too far gone, and the skies were dominated by aircraft the Fliegende Faust couldn't touch. So yes, it failed in combat. But the idea itself? Revolutionary. A handheld, portable anti-air system was something the world had never seen before. Today's shoulder-fired missiles, like the Stinger or Igla, they all trace their lineage back to this strange, last-ditch invention. The Fliegende Faust may have missed its mark, but it fired the first shot in a new era of ground-to-air warfare. How do you build one of the most advanced code machines in history, and still lose the war? That's the strange, almost tragic irony behind the Enigma machine, Nazi Germany's most tightly guarded secret. To the Nazis, Enigma wasn't just a tool. It was the key to running a global war. Every U-boat patrol, every battle order, every high-level command was encrypted through this compact, electromechanical device. With its rotating rotors and plugboard system, Enigma could generate over 150 quintillion possible combinations. That's a 1 followed by 20 zeros. Each day, the settings changed. Even if the Allies got their hands on a machine, without the exact daily setup, the messages remained locked. That's how secure the Germans believed it was, uncrackable by any human mind. But at Bletchley Park, a group of Allied codebreakers were quietly proving them wrong. With early computers, mathematical genius, and endless persistence, they cracked Enigma wide open. Suddenly, Allied commanders weren't guessing, they were listening. They knew where U-boats would strike. They saw troop movements before battles began. It turned the tide of the war without a single bullet. Some historians believe breaking Enigma shortened the war by at least 2 years, saving millions of lives. The Enigma machine was brilliant. Complex. Nearly perfect. But its downfall wasn't in the machine, it was in the belief that no one could break it. And that mistake helped seal the fate of a regime that thought its secrets would never be uncovered. What if a weapon didn't need to see its target, only hear it? That was the radical thinking behind Nazi Germany's acoustic proximity fuses, one of the most futuristic weapons concepts of World War II. These experimental fuses were designed to detect the unique sound signatures of enemy aircraft, like the low hum of a bomber's engine. The goal? Anti-aircraft shells that would explode the moment they heard a plane approaching, no direct hit required. It was an ingenious idea. Instead of firing blindly and hoping to score a hit, these fuses would trigger midair just by sensing the right sound frequency. That meant a much higher chance of striking Allied bombers long before they reached their targets. And during a time when Allied air raids were flattening German cities, a weapon like this could have changed everything. But it never made it to the battlefield. Why? The technology was too unstable. The fuses were either too sensitive, detonating too early, or not sensitive enough, failing to explode at all. The margin for error was razor thin, and with Germany's war machine running low on time, fuel, and materials, they couldn't afford to perfect it. So the acoustic proximity fuse stayed locked in the lab. But the concept? It was a glimpse into the future. Today's smart munitions, heat-seeking missiles, and advanced sensors all build on the same principle, weapons that don't just strike, they think. It's a chilling reminder of how close the world came to a new kind of battlefield, one where sound alone could trigger death from the sky. It looked like a fighter jet, but flew like a missile. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet wasn't just another Nazi aircraft, it was a rocket-powered monster that shattered the boundaries of World War II aviation. This machine didn't cruise, it launched. Straight into the sky, hitting speeds close to 700 miles per hour. Allied pilots had no chance. Even the legendary P-51 Mustang was left in the dust. The comet could appear, strike, and vanish before anyone even realized it was there. Armed with twin 30mm autocannons, it was built to rip through Allied bomber formations in a single pass. But at that speed, aiming was almost impossible. Most attacks lasted seconds, blink, and the fight was over. But speed came at a brutal cost. Its rocket fuel was so unstable, it could explode on the runway. Ground crews died just preparing it for flight. Pilots? Some never even made it into the air. And once its brief burn ended, it became a glider, silent, slow, and dangerously exposed. Still, the Nazis pushed forward. Over 300 comets were built in a desperate attempt to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. The Me-163 didn't just break records. It blurred the line between ambition and insanity, and left a trail of fear every time it took to the skies. Think Nazi Germany only had its sights on Europe? Think again. Hitler had a chilling plan, to strike the United States with a bomber that could fly from Europe to New York City and back, without refueling. It was called the America Bomber. And yes, it was real. In the early 1940s, Nazi leadership approved a top-secret project, build a long-range strategic bomber capable of crossing the Atlantic, dropping its payload on U.S. soil, and returning home. This wasn't just about destruction, it was psychological warfare, a move meant to shake American confidence to its core. Germany's top aircraft makers jumped in. The Messerschmitt Me 264 led the charge. It could fly over 3,600 miles, hit speeds around 310 miles per hour, and carry more than 6,600 pounds of bombs. On paper, it was terrifying. But in the air, problems piled up. The Me 264 was fragile, underpowered, and burned fuel too fast. Other versions from Junkers and Heinkel never made it beyond prototypes. The idea was bold, but time, resources, and reality worked against them. As Allied forces advanced and Nazi industry crumbled, the America bomber faded into the background, just another haunting what-if of the war. But it came close. Too close. Had even one of those bombers reached New York, the psychological impact could have changed everything. It's a dark reminder of how far Hitler was willing to go, and how narrowly the world avoided a battlefield on American soil.